Yugi has always been known to be the better duelist than Kaiba, even if Kaiba had the better cards. To put it nicely, Kaiba has always had an inferiority complex over his dueling skills compared to Yugi.
Yugi gave his Duel Monsters Championship crown to some nobody!
But despite that, a lot of Kaiba's cards are actually pretty powerful. Blue Eyes was stronger than Dark Magician, Kaiba had more broken spells, and to top off, his monsters were all pretty strong beaters. And if we take a look at his actual deck, it's pretty infamously known to spawn some of Yu-Gi-Oh's most powerful and broken spells and traps, so much so that even their real-life TCG equivalents had to be banned or limited. To a casual viewer, there's an idea that Kaiba's deck is really powerful. After all, as free copies of Blue Eyes, why wouldn't it be the best? But despite Kaiba's borderline game-breaking spells and traps, the remaining cards in his deck are iffy to say the least. From his free Blue Eyes, to his Xyz monsters, to even Obelisk the Tormentor, we'll be taking a deep dive into every deck Kaiba has used to see what went wrong with his decks. One thing I'd like to point out about Duelist Kingdom before we get into the analysis is that it actually has different rules than the more traditional card game we all know and love. I'll give an abridged version, as there's literally an entire Wikipedia page dedicated to this, but each player has 2,000 life points. You could only attack with one monster, no direct attacks, and you could summon one monster per turn without tributes. Oh, and if an effect sounded cool enough and made sense with the cards, you could just make up one on the spot. Starting off with Kaiba's Duelist Kingdom deck, it's one of his lesser known builds, as it forgoes some of his more iconic cards. Of course, as Duelist Kingdom was in the earlier period of Yu-Gi-Oh!, you'll notice that most of the deck is full of normal monsters. Another key pattern across a lot of Kaiba's decks is that a lot of his monsters are really strong beaters, especially if you compare it to his competition. A lot of monsters have a considerable amount of attack, and when the lowest attack point normal monster in the deck is one with 1200 attack, you're doing pretty well. Rude Kaiser and Judge Man are pretty strong beaters, boasting 1800 attack and 2200 attack respectively. And Aquamador and Gyakuteno Megami also are really good walls, with both having 2000 defense. Now this might seem pretty underwhelming, especially if you look at modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Where stat points are more of an afterthought, but monsters having any stat over 2000 was pretty powerful. Very few monsters in this period had over 2000 attack without some sort of stat boost, so even an Aquamador in defense position would leave your opponent with a hard time. Now, there is a monster with pretty low attack, that being Sagi the Dark Clown with only 600 attack, and it was only used for one thing, but we'll get onto that later. Of course, we couldn't talk about Kaiba's deck without talking about Kaiba's Ace, probably one of Yu-Gi-Oh's most iconic monsters, Blue Eyes White Dragon. Shouldn't be too hard to see why this card is by far the most powerful, if not the most powerful monster in the game at that point. Again, to reiterate, levels were basically a non-factor of monsters back then, so dropping a monster of 3000 attack with literally no cost was genuinely broken. And you know what's even more insane? Kaiba had 3 of them. There was no other normal summonable monster that came close, with the only competition being Dark Magician with 500 less attack. Sure, and there were definitely more powerful monsters like Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth with 3500 attack or Gate Guardian with 3750 attack, but these monsters required insane setup to pull off, and with Blue Eyes you could just summon it cost free at any point. To get an idea of how powerful this card is, in the anime your average player's best monster would have at most 1900 attack, and maybe if you're lucky you'd have a monster in the 2000s. So a deck with 5 monsters over 2000 attack? Borderline broken. Another boost to this card's power was the format, as life points were 2000, and with the majority of monsters being around the low thousands or less, Blue Eyes was quite literally a one monster OTK machine all on its own. Even if we ignore the spells and traps with just Blue Eyes White Dragon, Kaiba should have dominated Duelist Kingdom if it wasn't for the heart of the cards. Moving on to the fact monsters, we again have a pretty phenomenal lineup here. One thing to know about the fact monsters, with the exception of Swordstalker, is that technically they weren't seen in Duelist Kingdom, but were seen in Kaiba's duel against the Duel Machine in Battle City. Within this duel, the Duel Machine used Kaiba's exact deck from Battle City, which meant that any cards it used in this duel was confirmed to also be in Kaiba's deck in Duelist Kingdom, so any cards like Cyberjar, Wall of Illusion, or Lord of D would be in his Duelist Kingdom deck, despite never making an appearance there. Cyberjar is a level 3 dark flip monster, where once it's flipped up, destroy all monsters on the field. Then both players reveal the top 5 cards from their decks. Then special summon all revealed level 4 or lower monsters in face up attack position or face down defense position. Also add any remaining cards to their hand. Cyberjar is another incredibly powerful card, as whilst the level 4 and below monsters in this deck aren't exactly that powerful, what is important is that it lets you search for your deck more. This is pretty crucial, as more often than not, this deck will have stronger monsters, spells or traps than your opponent, so a draw for you is way more valuable than a draw for your opponent when you're running free Blue Eyes or a Judge Man. A unique aspect of Duelist Kingdom was that any monsters destroyed by card effect would cause the player to lose half the monster's attack, so even if your opponent managed to build up a board full of multiple monsters, If they had a field of monsters with combined attack of even 4000 attack, then them attacking this card would be an instant loss. Lord of D is a level 4 dark spellcaster with 1200 attack and 1100 defense, and has the effect that dragon type monsters on a field cannot be targeted by card effects. Lord of D is an okay card. Its attack is pretty mediocre, which is bad when its effect is contingent on being on the field. Kaiba also only runs 3 dragons in his deck, so Lord of D's effect doesn't really work most of the time. It's a nice plus though to make your Blue Eyes White Dragon practically invulnerable to almost everything in Duelist Kingdom, with Blue Eyes and Lord of D. The fact that it has an effect though still does make it better than literally almost every normal monster with a similar amount of attack, so its place in the deck still isn't the worst. Trapmaster is a level 3 or flip monster with 500 attack and 1100 defense. Trapmaster, on being flip summoned, lets you select one trap card on the field and destroy it. If the selected card is set, pick up the card and see it. If it's a trap card, it's destroyed. If it's a spell card, return to its original position. Trap Jammer is also fine. It's a pretty slow form of trap destruction, but it was worthwhile for what the game was at the time. There weren't many ways to remove spells or traps, so even destroying a trap on flip was somewhat worthwhile. Wall of Illusion is a level 4 Dark Fiend with 1000 attack and 1850 defense, where if it's attacked by a monster, after damage calculation return that monster to the hand. Wall of Illusion would be a pretty good card in any other format than Duelist Kingdom. Returning a monster to the hand is functionally useless with these rules, as most monsters could just be summoned without tributes, so they could easily summon it next turn. Now, there are of course exceptions to this, such as Blackluster Soldier or Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth, which required a bit of sap to get out, and returning back to the hand would have meant an opponent would have had to reuse the tributes for them. But these cards were extremely rare, so the chances of seeing this card's effect be useful was slim. Even in the cases where you gain tempo by your opponent sending a monster back to their hand, it's not like it matters, as again for Duelist Kingdom rules you can attack directly, so even if they had a weak monster who attacked Wall of Illusion, you'd rather it stay on the field. The final effect monster in this deck is Swordstalker, a level 6 Dark Warrior monster, where a fourth of the attack of one monster in your grave is added to this card's attack. The reason for this card having a weird effect is because in Duelist Kingdom, monster effects were written weirdly, and in general a lot of rules were very hand wavy, so in this arc it was just a normal monster. But it functioned as an effect monster. But even with this effect, it was portrayed weirdly. A Swordstalker gained a quarter of its own attack, rather than a monster in the grave, and in later appearances went back to just being a normal monster with no effect. Overall, this card is pretty weird, contradicts itself, but at the very least it's an easy 2k beater in Duelist Kingdom, which still makes it one of the best monsters in Kaiba's deck. Moving on to the two known fusions, we have Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, a level 12, that's a fusion of 3 Blue Eyes with 4500 attack and 3800 defense. Boasting the highest stats in Duelist Kingdom, with it even being close to the highest attack in the entire anime, this card is genuine overkill for a format like Duelist Kingdom. There's also a whole nother can of worms when it comes to the Duelist Kingdom rules of this card, with how each one of its head is a different monster, so we'll just leave that for the time being. It can also one turn kill your opponent even if they use a card like Dark Magician, which itself was also an extremely rare card. Unfortunately, that's all this monster really is. Overkill. The card economy for this card is atrocious, by going -3 for a monster that is admittedly very powerful, but is ultimately just a beefed up version of normal Blue Eyes, and in most cases a single Blue Eyes gets the job done. There's virtually no chance of this card being destroyed unless your opponent makes up new rules on the spot, but worst comes to worst, you can just threaten to jump off a cliff. Rabid Horseman is a level 6 Earth Fusion Beast Warrior monster with 2000 attack and 1700 defense, and that's a fusion of Battle Ox and Mystic Horseman. For similar reasons to Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, it's also kind of a useless card when you compare it to its 2 fusion materials. Sure, it does have 300 more attack than Battle Ox, but considering you're essentially going -2 for a stat boost of 300 attack, when your other monsters in the deck now already have 2000 or more attack without needing 2 other cards, makes this card seem kind of useless. Moving on to the magic and trap cards of the deck, we'll start with our first spell, being D-Spell, which rather simply lets you destroy one spell card on the field. It's a pretty good generic staple card, any sort of spell or trap destruction is always nice, especially as it can take out equipped cards that can cause your opponent's cards to become threats towards your Blue Eyes. Fluid of Summoning Dragon is a normal spell which lets every player special summon up to 2 dragon type monsters from their respective hands. This card is pretty bad in Duelist Kingdom, the deck only has 3 dragons, and there's no advantage to running this card, when you could just simply normal summon them, and as the rules don't let you attack with more than one monster per turn, there's no real real advantage to this card. Negative Energy Generator is a normal spell which lets you triple the attack of one face-up dark monster you control. This spell is generally one of the most broken spells in the entirety of Yu-Gi-Oh!, tripling the attack of most monsters. Even if you were to use it on a monster with 1000 attack points, it would make it one of the best monsters to be used in a duel. There's also a fair number of dark monsters in the deck, and if it's used on a card like Swordstalker, it's basically game over for the opponent. Monster Reborn is another broken spell which lets you special summon any monster from either player's grave. I've already talked about this card in my Yu-Gi video, but another factor about this card is that it's just better in this deck, as in the off chance that your opponent manages to run over Blue Eyes, you can just reborn it with this card, so you can essentially play 4 copies of Blue Eyes instead of just 3. Polymerization is a normal spell which lets you send monsters from your hand or field to the grave to summon a fusion monster. Polymerization worked differently in Duelist Kingdom, as it would let you fuse any 2 cards of your choice. Basically, what it means is that unlike the normal card game, you aren't restricted to specific fusion material. It can be any 2 cards and a polymerization to perform a fusion summon. Another component of this card is that not every fusion results in good fusions, and you can even use your opponent's monsters for fusions. Again, similar to D&D rules. This card is kind of hard to evaluate because it's literally just a anything kinda goes card, but regardless, it's still a pretty good utility. Now for the traps, we have Ancient Lamp, which reflects all attacks. This isn't really that clear of an effect, but based on Kaiba's use, it appears to cause the opponent's monster to instead attack one of their own monsters, which if true, makes this a devastating card. It can cause your opponent to cause a self-kill by forcing them to attack one of their own weak monsters, or even take out a problematic monster. Defense Paralysis can be activated when an opponent's monster is changed to defense position. Change all monsters your opponent controls to attack position. This is another weird Duelist Kingdom card, as it has the art from Stop Defense, but is a continues trap, and if you take it as it is, it's not a totally useless card, especially with a Blue Eyes on board, and if your opponent tries to go on a defense, this card can even win you the game. Crush Card Virus, which is a normal trap which you can activate when a monster of 1500 or less attack is destroyed from your side of the field. You take no battle damage from this battle, then destroy all monsters with 1500 or more attack from your opponent's side of the field, hand and all remaining cards they draw for the remainder of the duel. While this card is in your grave, your opponent cannot special summon those monsters from the grave. Needless to say, this is by far one of the most powerful cards in the entirety of Duelist Kingdom. Any sort of destruction effect would be borderline broken, but a card that destroys any monster with over 1500 attack that is applied to the rest of the duel, there generally would be no way to win, or have any outs for a player after this effect gets applied. How exactly are you going to win a game when your best monster has 1500 attack? And it's pretty obvious that the writers also came to this conclusion, because of 7 times it's used in the anime, it's been prevented from being activated a total of 4 times. Mainly because the writers would have to pull some serious anime shenanigans for the duel to remain balanced after this. Now sure, there's a couple of ways that duels have attempted to get past the card's resolution. Joey's best plan against Kaiba was to use Monster Reborn to summon his own Blue Eyes against him, which doesn't really work when an opponent has 2 more of the same card. Yugi manages to beat Crush Card Virus just based on pure plot armor with multiplying Karibo, and Ishizu manages to get past this card with another similarly broken card that swaps her grave with her deck, so when a majority of its appearances are negated, you kinda have to know how broken this card is. Ironically enough though, it's even more broken in Duelist Kingdom, as it didn't just send monsters from your deck to the grave, they were infected, which meant that you could still draw them, but functionally you couldn't do anything with them, so you could even end up drawing dead cards. The only real caveat with this card is that ironically Kaiba's wealth and ability to get broken cards works against him, as the only card that works with Crush Card Virus is Sagi, so it's pretty prone to bricking, but still is a beast of a card regardless. Kaiba's deck in Duelist Kingdom was actually quite overpowered for the time, despite its weaker power level. Sure, it had a couple stinkers like Grappler, but if you compare it to other duelists in this arc and the amount of beaters Kaiba has in his deck, Kaiba realistically should have won every duel, if it wasn't due to plot convenience. Not many decks have out to 3 Blue Eyes, let alone a Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, and it also has by far the most broken card in this arc with Crush Card Virus, where in the case it managed to go off, that also should be an auto win, even if they manage to take out Blue Eyes White Dragon. So far, it seems that Duelist Kingdom sets a good precedent for Kaiba's decks, but does Battle City carry this trend? If you've enjoyed the series, make sure to subscribe. I'm still a pretty small channel, so when you subscribe, it lets YouTube know that you want to see more of my videos, and makes it more likely that my videos show up in your recommended feed, and also lets me know that this is the kind of content that you want to watch. In Battle City, the format shakes up considerably as the rules are a lot more concrete and well defined. It's a lot closer to the game we all know and love, and any wins a character makes is less of an ass pull, even if it does still happen occasionally. For starters, the biggest change has to be the fact that level 5 or higher monsters need to be tribute summoned with at least 1 tribute, level 7 or higher monsters need at least 2 tributes, and level 10 or higher monsters need 3 tributes. This greatly impacts Kaiba's deck. As before, even if many of his monsters were powerful beaters, they are carried by the fact that they didn't require tributes. This means that any cards like Rude Kaiser are considerably much worse, given that other level 4s exist with comparable or better stats. It also means that Kaiba just can't spam out Blue Eyes for free, so if Kaiba was still running his Duelist Kingdom deck, the presence of too many high level tribute monsters would be a hit against the deck in Battle City. It also thankfully means that I don't have to guess what card does, or that I have to worry about unclear wording of certain card effects, so there won't be any guesswork into what exactly polymerization does in Battle City. First off, generally looking at the monsters, and there's still a considerable number of normal monsters, even with it being a newer format. Kaiba's deck really packs a punch, probably more so than Duelist Kingdom. The average attack of the normal summonable monsters in Kaiba's deck is around 1700, which is pretty absurd, especially if you compare it to a deck like Joey's where he needs to run 3 level 5 normal monsters to reach cards with the 1800 attack mark. Really puts into perspective how busted Kaiba's main deck is. Battle Ox, Genie of the Lamp, XYZ Cannon, Force Raider are all really solid powerful beat sticks to use until you're able to summon the more powerful higher tribute monsters. Even the weakest monsters, barring the exception of Sagi, have 1600 attack, which is still a solid baseline of attack for Battle City. Of course, we still have Blue Eyes in the deck, but this time it requires you to tribute 2 monsters, instead of Duelist Kingdom allow you to summon it for free. Even with the 2 tribute requirement, Blue Eyes is still an extremely powerful monster. As with the other 2 tribute monsters in this arc, like Dark Magician or Red Eyes, it still leads the pack by a solid margin, and summoning it onto the field is still an extremely powerful move. There will be cases where you won't want to have more than 1 copy in your hand, and runs the risk of you bricking very often, but when it's Blue Eyes, you don't really have a choice not to run 3 of them. Moving on to the effect monsters, this time being much more plentiful, the monster lineup is still surprisingly stellar. Starting off with Blade Knight, a level 4 light warrior monster with 1600 attack and 1000 defense, which has the effect, if you have 1 or less cards in your hand, increase the attack of this card on the field by 400 points. And if this card is the only monster on your side of the field, negate the effects of flip effect monsters destroyed by this card as a result of battle. Blade Knight is still a solid card. While its attack is definitely on the lower end compared to Kaiba's other normal summonable monsters, its attack boost effect can be handy. In some cases, it also has a weird anti-flip effect, which to my knowledge was never used in the anime, probably due to its oddly niche weird requirements. All around, just an oddly specific card. Kaiser Glider is a level 6 Dragonlight monster with 2400 attack and 2200 defense, where it cannot be destroyed by a battle with a monster that has the same attack. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, return 1 monster on the field to its owner's hand. Kaiser Glider is another phenomenal card in the deck, if only for its stats. It's a level 6 2400 beater, which funnily enough just makes it better than Red Eyes, which is Joey's ace, but yeah, it's just another card for Kaiba. Even ignoring the level difference, it still has better overall stats with 2200 defense, which objectively just makes it better than Red Eyes. It also has a pretty powerful effect too. Unfortunately though, its first effect isn't really that impressive and too conditional to work, other than being the best way to run over Red Eyes with, but the second is extremely powerful, as it becomes extremely problematic to deal with if the opponent ever summons out a powerful boss monster to deal with it. Kaiser Sea Horse is a level 4 light sea serpent with 1700 attack and 1650 defense, which lets you treat it as 2 tributes for any tribute summon of a light monster. So not only is this monster a powerful beater, it also lets you easily summon out one of the most powerful monsters in this deck. Do I need to say more? This next card, being Masked Beast Asgardius, technically wasn't really part of Kaiba's deck, other than being used solely for the 4-way duel. So we won't be going in depth about this card's usefulness, as for this duel the turn order was determined by removing the monster with the highest attack from their deck. Kaiba won this card in an anti-duel, and couldn't even use it with his deck, so with its incredibly high attack of 3300 and not being able to use it in a duel, it was a smart way to guarantee his position. Sword Soul is a level 4 light fairy monster with 0 attack and 1900 defense, where when it is destroyed and sent to the grave, 1 face-up monster you control gains 1000 attack until the end phase. This is a pretty boring card all things considered. Its effect is incredibly situational, but it can serve as somewhat a good wall. Thunder Dragon is a level 5 light thunder monster with 1600 attack and 1500 defense. Lets you discard this card from your hand to the grave to add up to 2 more Thunder Dragons from your deck to your hand hand, and then shuffle your deck. You can only use this effect during your main phase. Now, this card on its surface is horrendously bad. It's a 1 tribute monster for stats not worse than even the weakest of monsters in the deck, and its effect allows you to discard itself to add 2 more copies. Well, there's a bit more than that. Thunder Dragon is also what's known as a deck thinner, as drawing 1 copy of it means that you can thin down your deck by 2 cards, allowing your deck to be more consistent and allow you to draw the actual powerful cards. It can also be used as discard fodder, but Kaiba's deck doesn't have too many of these. It doesn't quite have its real life meta use due to the lack of chaos monsters in the deck, but there's an aspect that makes this card better than it appears on the surface, as it actually has a fusion, twin-headed Thunder Dragon. This card rather simply is just a fusion of 2 Thunder Dragons with stats of 2800 attack and 2100 defense. Thunder Dragon's effect means that all you need to do is 1 polymerization and a single Thunder Dragon to create a 2-card combo, so when you have 3 Thunder Dragons in the deck, makes this combo somewhat consistent in comparison to other fusion monsters. Does it justify the inclusion of these cards in the deck? 2-card combo for a 2800 beat stick isn't anything to laugh at, but needing to run 3 functionally dead cards in the deck for it makes it mediocre at best and breaks a lot of hands at worst. Before we get onto the card you've all been waiting for, we'll cover a new set of cards Kaiba runs in this arc, the Union monsters. These are Y Dragon Head, Z Metal Tank, and X Head Cannon. They're all level 4 light machine monsters, where X Head Cannon has 1800 attack and 1500 defense, Y Dragon Head has 1500 attack and 1600 defense, and Z Metal Tank has 1500 attack and 1300 defense. Y Dragon Head lets you equip itself to any X Head Cannon as an equip card to let it gain 400 attack and defense points, and if that monster would be destroyed by battle, then you can destroy Y Dragon Head. Z Metal Tank can also equip itself to X Head Cannon and Y Dragon Head, and boosts the attack and defense of the card by 600 points. Similarly, if the equipped monster is destroyed by battle, you can destroy Z Metal Tank instead, and both allow you to unequip itself to special summon itself. So these kind of cards are all just alright. They have decent stats with X Head Cannon being a good beater, but their actual effects themselves are kind of underwhelming. Sure, turning X Head Cannon into a 2400 beater is pretty formidable, but that's a 2-card combo of 2 specific 1-ofs in the deck. For the most part, they're basically just vanillas, or occasionally become a 2-card combo for a 2k plus beater that has battle protection. Y Dragon Head also has a pretty arbitrary restriction of not letting you equip it to Z Metal Tank, which is presumably due to its letter ordering, but still feels unnecessary. The more interesting aspect of these cards is that they're also part of the very first contact fusions in Yu-Gi-Oh! With XY Dragon Cannon and XYZ Dragon Cannon. Now, in the anime, these cards can get slightly confusing, as XY Dragon Cannon isn't really a fusion, technically speaking. It was just Y Dragon Head attached to X Head Cannon, but functionally was the exact same. They just decided to represent a card as a fusion monster in the dub. It didn't have any special effect, that we know of at least, and despite the real life card game giving all 3 combinations of the cards in effect, the anime really bothered to show XY Dragon Cannon's combination, so we'll talk about the first actual Ixies fusion we have, XYZ Dragon Cannon, which is a level 8 light fusion monster with 2800 attack and 2600 defense. It's summoned by removing from play the 3 previously mentioned monsters, and its effect allows you to discard 1 card to destroy 1 card your opponent controls. Now, this is a pretty insane fusion, probably one of Kaiba's best. It has the same stats if you're to add on the Z Metal Tank and Y Dragon Head to X Head Cannon normally, but its destruction effect is close to broken, considering how monster destruction was an extremely rare effect to have, and cards that destroyed cards directly were banned, unless you happen to own a tournament being run, so you let cards like Crush Card Fires through, but I digress. It's important to note that it's not once per turn, so you could go for an extremely easy board wipe, and with literally any other monster in the deck, you could go for an extremely easy OTK. Now, it does require you to summon 3 specific monsters in your deck and have them not be destroyed, but given that they were all moderately decent beaters, it definitely could be worse. Now, for the monster you've all been waiting for, Obelisk the Tormentor is a level 10 divine beast with 4000 attack and 4000 defense. And its effect? Okay, just bear with me. This card requires 3 tributes to normal summon. This card's normal summon cannot be negated.
If this card is normal summoned, cards in effect cannot be activated, except effects of divine monsters. If this card is special summoned in face-up defense position, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, or when your opponent's monster targets another monster you control for an effect, change that target to this card. This card is unaffected by card effects while face-up on a field and cannot be card effects, except the effects of divine monsters. cannot be returned from the field to the hand by card effects. Your opponent cannot tribute this card. Control of this card cannot change. Your opponent cannot equip this card with equip cards. If this attack position card, 2000 during the damage step only. If this card is in attack position, you can tribute 2 other monsters, destroy all monsters your opponent controls, and if you do, inflict 4000 damage to your opponent. This card cannot declare an attack the turn you activate this effect. Once per turn during the end phase, if this face-up card was targeted by a spell monster this turn, negate that effect.
Okay, so that was pretty long. I've already been over this card a couple times. By the way, you should also watch these videos after you're finished with this one. It's not hard to see why this card is quite literally game-breakingly unbalanced. For starters, it has the highest base stats in the main deck, so you really shouldn't have trouble at all running over things with this card, and even then your opponent is unable to interact with it in any way, unless they manage to somehow get a monster with over 4000 attack points on the field. Its summon can't be negated, your opponent's card effects can't affect it at all, and your opponent can't tribute it with this card. I wasn't even aware of this before, but apparently Obelisk also gives your other monsters protection, as your opponent cannot attack your other monsters, as any attacks get redirected to Obelisk as if this card wasn't broken enough. That alone would have made Obelisk the best card in the deck, but when we move on to its actual effect, you can tribute 2 other monsters to either destroy all monsters your opponent controls and inflict 4000 burn damage, or allow this card's attack to become infinity. But what this all means is that if you manage to dump Obelisk to the grave and have 2 other monsters on your field, you can very easily special summon it out using either Monster Reborn for an instant win, as long as your opponent has a single monster in attack position, or has 4000 points or less, which is literally every game. This card is absolutely broken in every way, and there's barely any downsides to this card. Sure, it takes 3 tributes and is pretty slow, but for a walking nuclear bomb, it's a pretty good trade-off. We'll move on to the spell and trap section of this deck, and as a whole, Kaiba again seems to have done pretty well for himself. There's the usual staples like Monster of Reborn, Pot of Greed, and Crush Card Virus, but he seems to have acquired some similarly broken cards in this arc, one of which is Card of Demise, a normal spell that lets you draw cards until you have 5 cards in your hand. During your 5th standby phase after activation, send all cards in your hand to the graveyard. The quote-unquote downside of this card is so laughable that even in the anime, Kaiba never ended up discarding all of the cards in his hand from the cost of this card, and it's not hard to see why. In many cases, it's not hard to go +4 after exhausting your hand completely from a combo or setting multiple traps. So if you manage to draw 5 completely new cards to do more plays with, you logically speaking should be able to win in 1 or 2 turns, let alone 5 whole turns. It could even be seen as better than Yugi's Card of Sanctity, as if you draw it later on in a duel, your opponent couldn't draw cards alongside you. This card is that broken that even in a TCG, a heavily neutered version of this card not only let you draw cards until you had 3 in your hand, and let your opponent take normal damage this turn, the same turn you activated this card, you'd be forced to send your hand to the grave, and that you also couldn't special summon the same turn, it was still limited in a TCG and banned in Master Duel for being that broken. Virus Cannon is a normal spell that lets you send spell cards in your opponent's hand and deck to the graveyard. So yeah. Kaiba seemed to hold every single broken card in the game, because if you manage to get this card off along with Crush Card Virus, well, that just leaves you with weak monsters and traps, which makes it even crazier that Ishizu was 1 step away from winning with both of these cards applied to her. A spell that you can just activate at any time to make sure your opponent has no access to spells for the rest of the game, and also potentially causing your opponent to go minus as it also discards from the hand. With 90% of decks, this card being played alone would be an instant loss, as there would be very little way to now counter high attack cards like Blue Eyes without attack boosting cards. I mean, at least Crush Card has a requirement to be activated, which makes this card all the more devastating. Now, the card text shown in the anime was written that it could send every single spell, but Kaiba in the game states not only discards 10 total spells. Either way, sending 10 of your opponent's spells, which is likely the majority of their spell arsenal, or sending every one can very easily cripple an opponent. Lullaby of Obedience is a normal spell where you pay 1000 life points and declare the card name of a level 8 or higher monster card. If the declared card is in your opponent's deck, add that card from their deck to your hand. Lullaby of Obedience is surprisingly yet another powerful card, given that most level 8 or higher monsters in Battle City are deck dependent and require setup, and if anything, Kaiba's deck is pretty much guaranteed to have the better boss monsters with Obelisk and Blue Eyes White Dragon, so grabbing yet another 2 tribute monster is most just likely going to be worse than Kaiba's own boss monsters. What's most important about this card though is its ability to prevent your opponent from having your own boss monster. Imagine if Kaiba gave this card to Yugi instead of Fiend's Sanctuary. How is Mario going to win if he couldn't even play a Winged Dragon of Ra? Enemy Controller is a quick play spell where you give a command to one of your opponent's monsters on a field with Enemy Controller, and then put one of the following set of controls to get the appropriate effect. Up, left, down, right, A is explode, and left, right, A, B is sacrifice. To translate the full effect, you had the choice of either destroying the opponent's monster or taking control of it. Enemy Controller was yet another example of a powerful spell Kaiba was filling his decks with, as it was a pretty broken multi-purpose card. It was one of the few cards that could destroy monsters for no cost, and on top of that, you could also use it to steal your opponent's boss monster instead. If by some miraculous reason your opponent also managed to summon a powerful boss monster, enough to contend with Blue Eyes. Did I also mention that it was quick play? This card is basically the equivalent of a chainable brain control or a no-cost Raigeki break, all in one. Cost down lets you downgrade one monster card in your hand by 2 levels until the end phase of this turn after this card is activated. Cost down is a pretty powerful card. Anything that can get your Blue Eyes out on the field is always going to be useful. It's a weird card because on the one hand, you don't want too many high-level monsters in your deck, but the lack of many high-level monsters in your deck also means this card's use is mitigated. It might be seen in a better light if it wasn't for a much more powerful version of this card existing in the form of a Soul Exchange. A normal spell now lets both players tribute summon by using monsters their opponent controls. Soul Exchange is genuinely a devastating card, where this card along with Obelisk can even be a 1-turn combo for an OTK. Since it doesn't limit the number of monsters you contribute, you can very easily use it to clear an opponent's board to summon a Blue Eyes or an Obelisk, leaving them open for an OTK. It also helps in so many cases. It can let you easily summon Obelisk for free, lets you remove any boss monsters your opponent controls, or set up for an OTK. For our first truly awful card, we have First for Compensation, a quick play spell that you can activate when your opponent adds a card to their hand by a card effect. Special summon up to 2 level 4 or lower monsters from your hand in face up defense position. These monsters cannot change their battle positions and also cannot be tributed. There's only really one function for this card, and it's to summon the required tributes so Obelisk can proc his effect, and that requires 2 tributes. This card might be useful if you could use it to summon a Blue Eyes or even use it to spam monsters for an attack, but given that it basically forces you to turn your monsters into unusable walls that only serve to be destroyed, it's basically useless. It's even worse that you consider that you may as well just be better off normal summoning your level 4 monsters, because of the high attack monsters in this deck, so you can actually use them. Absorb Spell is a spell that you can activate when an attack of an opponent's monster is increased by the effect of a spell card. Your monsters gain that attack instead. Absorb Spell is by most metrics unusable. Sure, it can work out occasionally, but in most cases the card is just going to be lying dead on your field, waiting for your opponent to boost their monsters. You'd be better off just running a card that you can boost the attack of your own monsters with. It's ultimately just too reactive a card to be considered good. Card Guard is a quick play spell that lets you discard one card from your hand. This turn, monsters you control cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects. Card Guard is pretty broken for many use cases. If you're building up to 3 tributes for Obelisk, you can use it to protect your board, or even chain it to a card like Mirror Force for some easy protection. Or if the opponent manages to build a board capable of bringing down your boss monster like Blue Eyes, it can be a good way to give yourself a turn before you make a counter attack. An interesting spell that Kaiba uses is Quick Attack, that allows fusion monsters to attack the turn they are summoned. As I mentioned before, fusion monsters function differently from the real life game, where they wouldn't be able to attack the turn they were summoned, as a way to nerf them, given their high attacks. But with its actual use, it's more of a plot device, rather than anything actually useful. It's a good narrative way to change the flow of a duel, as it can provide for an unexpected attack by a fusion monster. But in a normal realistic duel, fusion summoning itself rarely happens given the inconsistency, so it results in Quick Attack being a dead card in most cases. The surprise or tempo upgrade of being able to attack with a fusion monster the same turn is not nearly as useful enough to justify it being in a deck. Interdimensional Matter Transporter is a quick play spell that lets you select one face-up monster you control and remove it from the play until the end of the turn. It might sound like a useless card that doesn't do that much, because what's the point of removing your card for one turn, only then for it to come back in the same exact way during the end phase? Well, what this card actually can do is dodge any form of monster removal your opponent throws at you. For example, your opponent decides to activate a Raigeki blowing up your field, just chain this card to let your monster take a break for this turn, and it can come back all ready for action. It's still way too niche, but still a fun card that can come in handy occasionally. Shrink, rather simply, is a quick play spell that lets you half the attack of any monster on the field. Not much to say other than it being obviously very powerful. In a slow format like this, having an attack of problematic monsters is always going to be useful, if not for the extra damage, but also for the ability to deal with high attack monsters. It also can be combined with Crush Card Virus by being used on a dark monster like Force Raider to fulfill the 1000 attack requirement. Spell Sanctuary is a continuous spell that lets each player take one spell spell card from their deck and add it to their hand. When this card is face up on the field, players can activate spell cards on their opponent's turn. This card again was another case of a plot device being used in anime. As in a manga, duelists could use spells during their opponent's turn like they were traps, but looking at it from the perspective of a real usable card, it's another game-breakingly powerful card. So many broken spells would become even more degenerate if activated during your opponent's turn. Your opponent finally manages to summon their boss monster out, chain a Regeki to the summon. Even if your opponent decided they didn't want to deal with every spell becoming a quick play spell and used their search on the mystical space typhoon, it wouldn't matter, as you still get free search for any spell from your deck. The only real issue of this card isn't necessarily with the card itself, but rather the deck it's found in. Looking at the spell cards Kaiba uses, there aren't really any normal spells that benefit from using this card. All the spells that are worth to use on your opponent's turn are already quick play spells. But what use is a chainable stop defense? Still, it's a pretty broken card solely based on the fact that it itself can let you add other broken cards like Card of Demise or Virus Cannon. Ring of Defense is a spell card that reduces the effect damage to you from the effect of a trap card to 0. This card is only really used as a 2-card combo alongside Ring of Destruction to prevent Kaiba from taking damage, but without it you're just looking at a card that can sometimes prevent you from taking 500 damage from Hinotama. Another awful card. Moving on to the traps in Battle City, Kaiba doesn't seem to use as many traps as one would expect, and somehow Kaiba manages to hit it out of the park again with the traps, with again a lot of the cards being so absurdly broken. Attack Guidance Armor is a normal trap that lets you direct an attack to a monster that is equipped with the cursed armor. Ignoring the weird borderline flavor text of the effect, going off of the anime usage, Attack Guidance Armor seems to redirect the attack of any of your opponent's monster's attacks to any other monster of your choice, which in that case makes the card a solid battle trap. Causing your opponent to destroy potentially a vital monster of theirs and causing some life point damage is always a good thing, or even forcing them to attack a strong monster. Just a reliable trap all around. Magical Trick Mirror is a normal spell that you can only activate when an opponent's monster declares an attack. And then you can activate one spell card from your opponent's grave. Being able to steal any spell means that you now have access to cards like Monster Reborn, Pot of Greed, and Card of Sanctity. You could even use this card alongside Virus Cannon, so you have access to the entirety of the opponent's spell lineup. Power Balance is a normal trap that you can only activate when you have no cards in your hand. Your opponent discards half of the cards in their hand, and draw cards equal to the number of cards your opponent discarded. As if Kaiba didn't have enough broken draw cards, Power Balance not only lets you go plus in card advantage, but also make your opponent go negative, so it essentially can be a +6. It's even more broken if you draw it on your starting turn, exhaust your hand, and then use this on your opponent's draw, leaving them with 3 cards in their hand. Even if you draw this later in the game where the opponent only has 1 or 2 cards, it's still a +1 at worst. Cloning is a normal trap that you can only activate when your opponent summons a monster, duplicate that monster, and special summon a copy to your field. There's no real way to tell if the duplicated monster keeps the original effects, which would be pretty powerful in cases where you could copy a card like Dark Paladin, but it can be used for a 1-for-1 trade of their monster or for tribute summoning. Final Attack Orders is a continuous trap where as long as this card remains face up on the field, all face up monsters on the field are changed to attack position and cannot change in a battle position. Upon activation, both players choose 3 cards in their respective decks. All cards that were not selected are sent to their respective graveyards, and 3 chosen cards are returned to their respective deck zones in any order. It appears that Yugi and Kaiba's duel spawned a lot of insanely broken cards, as this card was used in that duel. Within the deck though, it's kind of useless, as there are not many cards that benefit from discarding your entire deck to the grave. It can be used to set up for a monster reborn into an obelisk, but besides that, the deck doesn't have too many ways for it to interact with the grave. The final trap is Ring of Destruction, which lets you destroy one face-up monster and inflict damage to both players equal to its attack. Ring of Destruction is yet another powerful trap that Kaiba utilizes in his deck. It's not only a solid piece of removal, but also deals burn damage to finish off your opponent. Dealing burn damage is pretty solid in a beatdown deck like Kaiba's, where you can even combo it by dealing 1000 damage with literally any monster, and use Ring of Destruction on Blue Eyes to seal the deal. So overall, you'll notice that Battle City is quite a bit of a step up in terms of power, in comparison to Duelist Kingdom, which was to be expected. It has most notably a god card, and plenty of powerful normal summonable monsters. So many of these monsters are incredibly powerful, which themselves could be an ace card for another character, but is yet another monster for Kaiba. Unfortunately though, the ratio of high level monsters to lower level monsters isn't the best, with 10 tribute monsters and 50 normal summonable monsters, which can lead to some hands being bricked, but it's not nearly as bad as another certain duelist. The trap and spell lineup though is pretty stellar. There's a lot of broken draw cards like Pot of Greed, Card of Demise, and Power Balance, so the deck shouldn't have too much trouble with consistency. With cards like Crush Card Virus or Virus Cannon, your opponent won't even be able to play the game. Even with the number of high tribute monsters, the spells and traps help with this issue, with cards like Soul Exchange, Enemy Controller, or the number of ways to deal with powerful monsters like Ring of Destruction, Attack Guidance Armor, or Shadow Spell. The deck has most of its bases covered. Overall, it's probably Kaiba's deck at at its best. Sure, there's definitely a couple optimizations that could be made, like getting rid of Sword Stalker and Gadget Soldier, but the deck as a whole is still pretty powerful. This is just part 1 of Kaiba's deck analysis, but part 2 is where things get really wild. Kaiba makes some really weird choices, especially in the movies, so make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you don't miss it. And while you wait, check out this video where I break down why Jaden's deck, despite all the hype, actually sucked.